Sam was not the kind of person anyone noticed. He was young, thin, and quiet. He wore the plain gray uniform of a citadel servant, and he kept his head down and his hands busy. Every morning before the sun touched the tall stone towers of Embervale, Sam was already awake. He swept floors, carried linens, refilled water basins, and polished the lower corridor stones until they shone. He did his work without complaint and without asking for anything in return. The citadel of Embervale was enormous. Its walls were black stone and its towers reached so high that clouds sometimes wrapped around the tops. Dragons lived here, great, powerful creatures with wings that blocked the sun when they flew overhead. They were rulers of this land, and the citadel was their home. Humans like Sam worked inside as servants. They were not mistreated. They were simply not noticed. To most of the dragons, a human servant was no different from a broom or a candle. Useful, quiet, and easy to forget. Sam had lived inside Embervale since he was 11 years old. He was used to being invisible. But even invisible people have eyes. And Sam's eyes noticed things. For the past month, something had been wrong in the royal wing. The dragon princess Saravan was sick. Sam had seen her only a few times from a distance, a young dragon with pale silver scales and wings the color of morning fog. She was said to be kind and sharp-minded, well-loved by the citadel staff. But for nearly a month now, she had barely left her chamber. The glow that dragons naturally carried in their scales, that warm, inner light that meant health and strength, had gone dull in her. Her wings hung heavy at her sides. She did not eat well. She did not speak much. Every single day, healers came to her chamber. Sam watched them come and go from the end of the corridor, pretending to sweep while he observed. Flame readers pressed their claws to her chest and studied the color of her inner fire. Root burners prepared bitter mixtures from rare plants and had her breathe the steam. Scale singers sat beside her and hummed old healing songs that were supposed to draw sickness out through the skin. None of it worked. Every healer left with their head low and their eyes troubled. None of them had answers. The sickness stayed, quiet and stubborn, and Saravan kept fading. Sam felt something twist in his chest each time he watched another healer walk away empty-handed. He did not know why it bothered him so much. He had no connection to the princess. He was just the servant who swept the hall outside her wing. But something about watching someone grow weaker day after day, while everyone around them failed to help, sat very badly with him. He started paying closer attention. He noticed that the healers always went straight to Saravan herself, her breath, her blood, her fire. They brought their tools and their knowledge and they focused entirely on her body. Not one of them looked at anything else. Not the food she ate, not the water she drank, not the room she slept in. Sam thought about his grandmother Edna. She had been a simple village woman who spent her life helping sick animals on the farm where he grew up. She had no scrolls or training. She just had good sense and steady hands. And she always said the same thing whenever a sick animal came to her. Before you look at the creature, Edna would say, wiping her hands on her apron, you look at where it sleeps. Sam had never forgotten that. One evening, near the end of his shift, he was carrying a stack of fresh linens down the corridor toward the storage room. He passed the doorway of the royal wing, closer than he usually went, and something stopped him. A smell. It was faint. Easy to miss if you were not paying attention. But Sam was always paying attention. It was earthy and slightly sour, like old leaves left too long in a damp corner. It drifted from somewhere deep inside the royal chamber where Saravan slept. Sam stood still for a moment, nostrils working, trying to place it. He had smelled something like that before. A long time ago. Back on the farm, back with Edna. He could not quite remember where or when, but something in the back of his mind told him it mattered. He took one step toward the doorway. Servant. A sharp voice came from behind him. One of the senior staff dragons stood at the end of the corridor, pointing toward the storage room. "Those linens will not walk themselves." Sam turned, tucked the memory of the smell away, and kept moving. But he did not forget it. Sam did not sleep well that night. He lay on his narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the stone ceiling above him, and thought about that smell. It stayed with him the way certain things do, not loud, not urgent, just quietly present, like a small stone sitting in the bottom of a shoe. Easy to ignore. Hard to forget. By the time the first gray light crept through the small window above his bed, Sam had already made a decision. He was going to ask questions. He started small. He knew better than to go marching up to senior staff with a head full of half-formed ideas. He was a floor servant. The lowest rank in the Citadel. Nobody wanted to hear his thoughts, and he knew it. So instead, he went to the people who were just like him, the ones who worked quietly and saw everything. At breakfast in the servant hall, Sam sat beside an older human woman named Agnes who had worked in the royal wing for 11 years. She was a sharp woman with gray-streaked hair and quick eyes, the kind of person who noticed things without being asked to. Sam kept his voice low. "Agnes," he said, stirring his porridge slowly, "when did the princess first fall ill? Do you remember the exact time?" Agnes glanced at him sideways. "Why do you ask?" "Just thinking," Sam said simply. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then she set down her spoon. "It was about a month ago. Maybe 5 weeks. I remember because it started just a few days after that grand sleeping platform arrived." Sam looked up. "The sleeping platform?" Agnes nodded. "A gift. From one of the noble clans in the eastern reaches. A big heavy thing, carved dark wood, covered in symbols. Very grand. The sovereign accepted it as a gesture of goodwill and had it moved into Saravin's chamber to replace her old one." Sam said nothing. He just nodded slowly and looked back down at his bowl. But inside, something was clicking into place. After breakfast he found another servant, a young dragon named Bren who worked the morning shift in the supply rooms near the royal wing. Bren was quiet and unsure of himself, the sort who always looked like he was waiting to be told he had done something wrong. Sam asked him the same careful question. Bren thought about it and gave the same answer. The illness began shortly after the new sleeping platform arrived. Sam thanked him and walked away slowly. He stood alone in the lower corridor for a long moment, turning the information over in his mind like a smooth stone in his palm. The healers had come every day for nearly a month. Skilled, trained, experienced healers with years of knowledge and rooms full of medicines. And not one of them had thought to ask when the sickness started or what had changed around the same time. They had all gone straight to Saravin. Her breath, her fire, her blood, her scales. They treated her body like a puzzle to be solved and looked nowhere else. It made sense, in a way. That was how healers were trained. The sickness is in the creature, so you study the creature. But Edna had taught Sam something different. He could hear her voice clearly even now, all these years later, that warm, unhurried voice that always made difficult things sound simple. She would say it while walking between the animal pens on the farm, hands folded behind her back, boots quiet on the straw-covered ground. "Before you look at the creature," Edna would say, "you look at where it sleeps. A sick bed makes a sick body. Always has. Always will." Sam had watched her prove it more than once. A goat that stopped eating, Edna found a patch of mold growing beneath the hay in its pen. A dog that trembled and could not stand, Edna discovered a cracked water trough leaking something foul into the soil beneath it. Every time, the other villagers had focused on the animal. Edna had looked at the surroundings. And every time, Edna had been right. Sam straightened his back and made a decision. He would go to the head healer. He found the healer in the preparation room near the east corridor, a tall, broad dragon named Voron, ancient and silver gray, with the quiet authority of someone who had never once been told he was wrong. He was sorting through jars of dried ingredients when Sam knocked carefully on the open doorway. Voren did not look up. "What is it?" It was not a question. It was barely an acknowledgement. Sam stepped inside one careful step. "Sir," he said quietly, "I had a thought about the princess. About her illness." Voren's claw paused over a jar. Then he continued sorting. "You are a floor servant." "Yes, sir." "You have no training in healing." "No, sir. But I noticed that the illness began right after the new sleeping platform arrived in her chamber. My grandmother always said to check where a creature sleeps before." "Your grandmother?" Voren said it the way someone might set down something they had no interest in carrying. Flat. Final. He did not look at Sam once. "Return to your duties," Voren said. "Leave the healing to healers." Sam stood in the doorway for one more second. Then he nodded quietly, turned around, and walked back down the corridor. He was not angry. He was not even surprised. But he was more certain than ever that he was right. Sam waited until the citadel was quiet. That took patience. Embervale never went fully silent. There were always guards at the upper gates, always a fire burning somewhere in the deep halls, always the distant sound of wings shifting on high perches. But there was a particular kind of quiet that settled over the lower corridors late at night, when the senior staff had retired and the night servants were focused on their own small tasks in distant parts of the building. That was the quiet Sam was waiting for. He sat on the edge of his cot in the dark, still fully dressed, and counted the minutes. When he finally moved, he moved carefully. He did not take a torch. Torches drew attention and left smoke trails in the air that dragon nostrils could detect long after the flame was gone. Instead he took a single small candle, the kind used to light the reading tables in the lower library, short, slow-burning, easy to shield with a cupped hand. He lit it from the ember of the hall lamp outside his door and walked. He also took a cloth. A thick one, folded twice. He pressed it against his nose and mouth before he even turned into the corridor that led toward the royal wing. That smell was still there. Faint, but present. Like something damp and forgotten, slowly exhaling in the dark. Sam followed it. The royal wing at night was empty and still. The great carved doorway to Saravan's chamber stood partially open, the way it always was to allow the healers easy entry in the mornings. Sam stood outside it for a long moment, listening. Nothing moved inside. He could hear Saravan's slow, labored breathing from across the room, the deep, uneven rhythm of a creature that was not well, not resting easily, just enduring. He slipped inside. The chamber was large and high-ceilinged, the way all dragon rooms were. The walls were dark stone hung with pale fabric, and moonlight came through the wide arch of the sleeping window in long silver strips. Saravan lay on the great sleeping platform at the center of the room, curled in on herself, eyes closed, silver scales dull in the low light. She did not stir. Sam moved along the far edge of the room, staying close to the wall, keeping his footsteps soft on the stone floor. The smell was stronger here. Much stronger. It pressed against the cloth over his face with a weight that made his eyes water slightly at the edges. Not overwhelming. Not sharp. Just persistent and thick, like something that had been building in this room for weeks without anyone noticing because they were never close enough to the ground. That was the thing about smells like this one. They sank. They did not rise and spread the way smoke did. They settled low, near the floor, near the ground. Anyone standing upright in this room would catch only the faintest trace of it. But down low, down where Sam was going, it would be entirely different. He got down on his hands and knees beside the sleeping platform. He brought the candle close to the floor and looked beneath. The underside of the platform was thick carved wood, dark and heavy, decorated with the symbols of whatever Eastern noble clan had sent it as a gift. And there, tucked into a hollow space carved into the wooden base, a hollow that was clearly meant to hold something, built deliberately into the design, was a bundle. Sam reached in slowly and drew it out. It was herbs. Dried herbs, wrapped tightly in dark cloth and bound with thin cord. Or they had been dried, once. Now they were something else entirely. The bundle was soft with rot, the cloth stained dark with moisture, the herbs inside broken down almost to dust and releasing a slow, steady vapor that rose in a faint shimmer when the candle flame came close. Sam sat back on his heels and stared at it. He knew these herbs. He had seen them growing along the fence line of Edna's farm when he was a boy. She had pointed at them once and told him never to bring them inside near the chickens or the goats. Perfectly harmless to humans, she had said. But when they rotted, when moisture got into them and they began to break down, they released something that worked its way slowly into the lungs of scaled creatures. Not fast enough to cause sudden harm. Just slow enough that no one would think to connect it to anything. Week after week, night after night, Saravan had been sleeping directly above this bundle. Breathing it in. Slowly. Quietly. And every healer who came to examine her had stood upright in the center of the room and found nothing wrong. Because none of them had ever gotten down on the floor and looked. Sam carried the bundle to the supply room at the end of the corridor and found a clay pot with a tight-fitting lid. He placed the bundle inside carefully, sealed the lid, and pressed the edges with a strip of cloth soaked in water to make the seal tighter. Then he found a small piece of parchment and a stick of marking coal on the supply shelf. He wrote slowly and clearly, the way Edna had taught him to write as a boy. Found beneath the sleeping platform. Rotting herb bundle. Do not open without cloth pressed over nose and mouth. He did not write an explanation. He did not write his name in full. He simply pressed his servant's mark at the bottom, a small stamped symbol that every Citadel servant carried on a wooden disc at their belt. And carried the sealed pot and the note to the preparation room where Voron worked each morning. He set them both on the table where they could not be missed. Then he walked back to the servants' quarters, lay down on his cot, and closed his eyes. He did not know what would happen in the morning. He did not know if anyone would listen. He did not know if he had done the right thing or simply made a very quiet mistake. But the bundle was out of that room. And for the first time in a long while, that had to be enough, you said. Part 4, the morning they finally listened, a young dragon healer named Asha opened the clay pot, recognized the spore vapor immediately, and had the cha. Voron arrived in the preparation room before sunrise, the way he always did. He was a creature of habit. The same path every morning, the same order of tasks, the same slow and deliberate movements that came from decades of doing things exactly the way he believed they should be done. He set his satchel on the side bench, rolled back his sleeves, and turned toward his worktable. He saw the clay pot immediately. He saw the note beside it. He stood very still for a moment, reading the words once. Then he read them again. His expression did not change. He reached out one claw toward the lid of the pot, paused, then drew his hand back. He looked at the servant's mark stamped at the bottom of the note. Small. Familiar. The mark of a lower hall servant. He set the note down and turned away. He had other work to do. It was Asha who found it an hour later. Asha was the youngest healer in the Citadel. Barely 2 decades old by dragon measure, which made her young in the way that a green branch is young, still flexible, still willing to bend. She had only recently completed her training and had been assigned to assist with Saravan's case largely because the senior healers had run out of ideas and needed someone to manage the morning preparations while they thought of new ones. She came into the preparation room quietly, shrugging her healer's wrap onto her shoulders, and stopped when she saw the clay pot sitting in the center of the worktable where nothing had been the night before. She read the note slowly. The smell hit her immediately even through the cloth. She closed the lid at once, but she had seen enough. Her eyes went wide above the cloth. She stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds, and then she turned and moved quickly out of the room. She knew exactly what that was. She had read about it in an old scroll during her second year of training, a rare eastern herb, completely harmless in its dried state, used for generations as a blessing bundle in noble household ceremonies. But in the wrong climate, in a room with too much moisture in the stone walls, the bundle would slowly break down. And as it rotted, it released a vapor that settled low to the ground and worked its way over weeks into the lungs and scales of any dragon sleeping nearby. The effect was gradual. Cumulative. It looked like a dozen other illnesses and tested like none of them because no healer ever thought to look for it. Because no healer ever thought to look beneath the bed. Within the hour, Asha had brought 3 other healers to the chamber with cloths over their faces. The sleeping platform was dismantled and carried out piece by piece. The chamber windows were thrown fully open and a large fanning cloth was worked back and forth across the room by 2 servants to push the stale air out. Every corner of the room was checked. Every surface was wiped down with clean water. Saravan lay on a temporary resting mat in the adjoining room and watched all of this with tired, confused eyes. By midday she was breathing more slowly. More evenly. The tight, labored quality that had been in every breath for a month began to ease by degrees, the way a clenched hand slowly opens. By afternoon the faintest warmth had returned to the edges of her scales, just a trace of the inner glow, like an ember catching rather than a fire burning, but it was there. Real. Unmistakable. By evening Lord Dreven knew something had changed. The dragon sovereign was not a creature who waited for news to come to him. He was tall and dark-scaled, broad through the shoulders, with the careful eyes of someone who had ruled a long time and learned that silence was rarely as empty as it appeared. When one of his attendants reported that Saravan's color was returning, he was already moving toward the healing rooms before the attendant finished speaking. He stood in the doorway of the adjoining room and looked at his daughter for a long moment. Saravan met his eyes. Neither of them spoke. But something passed between them that needed no words. Then Lord Dreven turned and summoned everyone. The healers assembled quickly in the main corridor, Voran at the front, the others behind him, Asha standing slightly apart with her hands folded and her eyes steady. Lord Dreven looked at each of them in turn. "Tell me," he said simply. Voran began to speak. He used careful, measured language. He talked about the herb bundle, about the vapor, about the treatment that had been applied. He made it sound orderly. Clinical. As though it had all unfolded according to a process. Lord Dreven let him finish. Then he looked at Asha. There was something in the sovereign's gaze that made it very difficult to say anything other than the truth. Asha had noticed this about him before. He did not threaten. He did not press. He simply looked, and the truth came out on its own. "It was not us, my sovereign," Asha said clearly. "We did not find it. A note was left on the preparation table this morning with the clay pot. The mark at the bottom belonged to a lower hall servant. A human. The one who cleans this wing." The corridor was very quiet. Voran's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Lord Dreven said nothing for a long moment. He looked down at the small servant's mark that Asha held out to him on the piece of parchment, that simple stamped symbol, pressed there by a young man who had expected nothing in return. "Bring him to me," Lord Dreven said. Sam was folding clean linens in the lower storage room when they came for him. 2 Citadel attendants. Tall dragon staff in formal grey wraps, appeared in the doorway and told him quietly that the sovereign wished to see him. They did not explain why. They did not need to. The words alone were enough to make Sam's hands go still on the linen he was holding. He set it down carefully. Smoothed it out of habit. Then he followed them. The walk through the citadel felt very long. Sam kept his eyes forward and his hands clasped in front of him and tried to keep his breathing steady. He had done nothing wrong. He knew that. But knowing a thing and feeling it are 2 very different matters, and with every corridor they walked and every staircase they climbed, the distance between what he knew and what he felt grew wider. He had entered the royal chamber without permission. He had handled something from the princess's room. He had left an unsigned note on a senior healer's table. Any one of those things, looked at from the wrong angle, could be made to sound very bad for a floor servant. By the time they reached the high hall where Lord Dreven was waiting, Sam's heart was beating considerably faster than he would have liked. The hall was wide and still. Evening light came through the tall stone windows in long amber columns, laying warm stripes across the dark floor. Lord Dreven stood near the center of the room, not seated on any throne or platform, just standing, which somehow made him more imposing rather than less. He was very large. Very still. His dark scales caught the evening light and held it. Saravan was there too. She was seated on a low resting bench to one side, wrapped in a light cloth, her silver scales carrying that faint returning warmth that had not been there yesterday. She looked tired still, but her eyes were clear and present in a way they had not been for a long time. Sam stopped a respectful distance away and lowered his head. For a moment no one spoke. Then Lord Dreven said, "Look at me." Sam looked up. The sovereign studied him the way a careful person studies something they want to understand fully before they speak about it. It was not an unkind look. But it was thorough. "You found what my healers could not find," Lord Dreven said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to fill a room. "You entered the chamber. You removed the source. You left a note and asked for nothing." He paused. "I want to know one thing. Why did you look, when they did not?" Sam thought for a moment. Not because he did not know the answer, but because he wanted to say it correctly. "Because I clean the floors, my lord," he said quietly. "I know what hides in the low places." The healers came in and stood tall and looked at the princess. "I came in and got on my knees and looked at the room. That is all I did." Lord Dreven was quiet for a long moment. Then Saravan spoke. Her voice was still a little rough at the edges, still recovering, but steady. "Father," she said, "I want him in my household. Not as a floor servant. As my personal attendant. Someone I can trust to notice what others miss." Lord Dreven looked at his daughter. Then he looked back at Sam. He was quiet for long enough that Sam genuinely did not know what was coming. Then the sovereign moved to the side table, lifted a small flat object, and walked toward Sam. He held it out. It was a carved disc, stone, not wood, smooth and dark, with a symbol pressed into its face that Sam did not recognize. "That is the mark of a citadel ward," Lord Dreven said. "A formal title. It means you answer to the royal household directly. It carries certain rights within these walls." He paused. "No human servant has carried that title in 3 generations." Sam looked down at the disc in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. He did not know what to say, so he said the only true thing he could find. "I only did what my grandmother taught me, my lord." "Then your grandmother was wise," Lord Dreven said simply, and stepped back. Later that evening Sam stood alone at the narrow window at the end of the east corridor, his corridor, the one he had swept every single morning for years without anyone looking twice at him. He held the stone disc in one hand and looked out across the citadel. The towers, the open sky, the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. Nothing around him had changed. The stones were the same. The air was the same. The citadel was exactly as it had always been. But something inside Sam was different. Something quiet and solid had settled into place in his chest, the way a stone settles into soft ground and stops moving. He thought about Edna. About her worn apron and her calm hands and the way she never once needed anyone to tell her that her knowledge mattered. She had always just known. And she had passed that knowing to him across 100 small lessons on a farm far away from any citadel or throne or grand stone tower. He wished she could see this. He thought she probably would have smiled, shrugged, and gone back to checking on the goats. Sam closed his fingers around the stone disk, looked out at the world that had spent years looking straight through him, and felt, quietly, completely, without any need to explain it to anyone, truly seen.